Mastery over electricity, maybe, but anyway. Alright, let me take my nap now. I feel like there are people who are going to hear that last recording and that really resonates with them. Yeah, humans aren't special. Dogs have thoughts, blah, blah. And then my concern is that that person is thinking that I would agree that dogs also have the magic in them. Dogs also have souls. Dogs are even more in tune with truth than we are, blah, blah, blah. And no, it's not that we're not special because we're not the only ones with magic. It's that we're not special because no one has magic, bro. And that's another thing I was thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know whether what I've started here is a good idea, this voiceover thing, but that's another thing I was thinking is that, and now, shit, I lost it, okay, bye. Oh yeah, right. I believe in magic as an experience, and I'm also really interested in, really curious about, really invested in understanding what's happening behind the magic. I've met a lot of spiritual people in my life, and I expect to meet a lot more, being a van person and stuff. And what's frustrating is that I love sharing the experience with them, of the experience of mushrooms, or of just feeling things, and of the feeling like there's such a thing as destiny and so on. Here I am. So they all think I'm very spiritual because here I am in Ibiza. I met a woman in Amsterdam who said she lived in Ibiza. So I came to Ibiza, and I say stuff like, look, if I don't meet her, then I'm not supposed to meet her. And if I am, then, I will. And I say spiritual stuff like that. But I wish that sometimes we could have another kind of conversation where we go, isn't it wild, these experiences we have where there's no such thing as coincidence. We feel like everything's a pattern, things are destined, things are decided for us. And we could also talk about the myth that we decide things for ourselves, that it's not just a whole bunch of atoms interacting, and that any useful label of I or self could never really be accurately referred to what the thinking activity is. Suppose you say, decisions are inputs coming in and outputs going out. And when there were a couple different options and the output is one of those options, then okay, that's what we describe as a decision. Whatever networks were involved in that process, you might want to say, okay, so that's me then. The thing is, for another mental event, or even for another decision, it won't be exactly the same networks involved, exactly the same mechanisms. So you say, that's me. But sometimes, now let's say you say, okay, all of that's me then. But sometimes some of those mechanisms might be running, and no part of anything you would normally consider your awareness is involved. So anyway, that's what I mean by the self is an elusive, undefinable kind of thing, really, except for to just say it's the output of that body in that moment. Or the thing experienced by that brain in that moment. So maybe you don't want to say it's all the things that brain produced. You just want to say whatever was experienced by the brain of the brain. That's Eris at that moment. Fred calls religion silly. And he'll talk about how scientifically it doesn't make any sense. For instance, this morning he was talking about the supposed duration that man has been on Earth, according to the Bible versus according to research. He says, that's crazy. They say it's only 6,000 years. Fred also believes in a sort of a life essence. And so material objects are either occupied by this life essence or not. The human body is a material object operated by this life essence. And then once the body stops, like a shooting star, he says, the life essence sort of rejoins some bigger soul. I've had enough conversations in my life to not try to convince him otherwise or sort of point out inconsistencies that I see. And also because I'm currently reading How Minds Change by David McRaney and learning all about street epistemology and deep canvassing and motivational interviewing. So I know that there's so much more to learn before trying to engage in certain conversations like I used to when I was younger. Or at least, having certain objectives, I should say. And I've learned enough about the mind to know that it's not as simple as you give people information and then they go, oh, okay. And then they draw the indicated conclusions from, the conclusions indicated by that information. And that's a big thing that the book says. It talks about the importance of telling your own personal narrative and so on. So anyway, I'm not ready to, and also, we're hanging out here on this island. No need to continuously tell them that this whole life essence thing is a thing that the human brain is able to imagine, but doesn't mean that the human brain actually has. Anyway. But I do sometimes say something like that. I say, just want to throw it out there. This thing that you keep saying we're imagining might just be imagining. And then he'll say, no. It definitely exists, blah, blah. Well, not much blah, blah. There won't be. Anyway. And I'm already having this conversation with my dad. It's so funny because he would think that what Fred's saying is silly. But my dad also believes that there's this magical quantum mechanical consciousness spirit force. Anyway. Here's the whole reason I started recording. It's just to tell you, just to note this comment. He said there are other worlds in response to one of my mild attempts to get him to consider otherwise. He said, no, there are other worlds. There have to be other worlds. There are other doors to other worlds. And then I said, I like to think of it as there are other windows. There are windows to other worlds. That in our mental experience, there are lots of windows to different experiences, feelings, understandings, or I should say interpretations, renderings, constructions. And then what we find is that it's really amazing the things we're able to see out of these different mental windows. just the way the images can change depending on what you've consumed, depending on how you're feeling otherwise, what situations you're in, who you're with, how tired you are, stuff like that. But then what's also really interesting is to know these are just LED displays. That we're not looking through this window at these magical realities outside of us that we'll never be able to understand, as Fred says. No, we're looking at displays of these amazing constructions that the brain can do. And that's like really cool. And it's also really cool to, watch the little picture show, to imagine, to see this reality or that, to feel this connection or that. And then I just think it's really cool to also be like, we know that we're watching movies. We know that we are just exist in this brain, in this dark skull. And sometimes we watch what's supposed to be the news channel, what's supposed to be objectively and perfectly relaying to us the information from the outside world. But there's no such thing. Every relayer has their own sort of conditioning or bias. And other times, we flip the channel, or we look out another window that's playing another channel. Something a little bit more fantasy. And it's a cool ride to go on. I love movies. I love TV shows. Just think it's cool to have conversations about movies and TV shows with people who know that they're movies and TV shows, and not, oh my gosh, Eris, you wouldn't believe the lives Julia Roberts has led. Yeah, okay, no, she was acting. What? No. I saw all these different lives. She was a hooker, and back in the 90s. And then she was in something recently, on Netflix maybe. She's had quite a few different experiences. Her name has changed. What are you talking about? My friend Fred said that the definition of intelligence is the ability to adapt. He was referring initially to adapting to new situations, new challenges, and I added also being able to adapt to new information. So if there's some belief that exists in your mind, disconfirming evidence comes along, whether or not you see it as disconfirming evidence and whether or not you're then able to adjust your belief in light of it, are also aspects of intelligence. But in general, it's the ability to adapt, whether that be to situations or new information. Okay, page 260. We're going to read 2 paragraphs from David McRaney's How Minds Change. The climate before the Ice Age was much like that of the 20th century, and it had been for a good long while. But the last half of the Pleistocene brought with it great impermanence. Alternating bouts of harsh and cold weather yielded little rain. Ice trapped much of the groundwater for long stretches, causing sea levels to dramatically rise and fall. Animals that thrived for a while in one extreme perished in the next as food and space routinely became scarce. It was as zoologist Peter J. Richardson told me. Like a fruit cart upset world with lots of high-frequency environmental change. That high frequency of change remained constant, and many animals that depended on slow-moving genetic evolution didn't make it. The ability to hunt prey, build nests, dig dens, howl to locate kin, or flock to mating grounds, without having to be taught, only keeps you alive when your generation is likely to face the same environment as the last 20. As a result, the mammoths and the tigers, the giant sloths and dire wolves, didn't survive, but our ancestors did. The difference, my fellow risers, between... Shit, I hope I haven't moved too far away from the phone. The difference between us and other animals isn't a magical soul or force or energy or whatever. But there is one difference, of course, is that we have a lot more neurons and a lot more connections. But there's another difference that I don't highlight enough because I think y'all think we're too different from other animals. But it is, so I like to remind you that no, we're not all that different. But I definitely see that one thing that we have is this ability to learn the way that we do, or the facility of learning. Now, again, it's not binary. Dogs can learn. But what David McGraney was saying in the chapter was that, see, an animal has, including us, can have written in its genetic code the basic instructions of how to hunt, how to build a home, whatever. Okay? And a lot of course, animals, they don't get raised by their parents. They just go off and do their thing once they pop out. We also have a lot of those instructions, a lot of those instincts and so on. But we're able to, on top of that, spend 18 years or, spend 13 years or whatever with our parents, learning what they learned. So this is the most up-to-date information. Just the very last generation, not what had been built into our genetic code over 20 generations, but the very latest stuff learned gets transmitted to the kids. Awesome. And we have the capacity to adapt. The situation changes, and often the way that our mechanisms work, new solutions can more easily be found than for other species, dramatically more easily. Okay. Or they can be conceived, I should say. Okay. But it's almost like the thing that separates us from other animals is the thing that we deny the most. What makes us awesome is that tradition, is that we don't have to do things the same way as the last 20 generations. And yet a great deal of human beings, their whole thing is the preservation of tradition rather than the adaptation to new demands and new information. And then intuition, everybody's like, oh, it's so important to listen to your heart, your intuition, your gut, blah, blah. Always go with your first instinct. Wait a minute, I think you guys missed the whole advantage of being human. We have the ability to experience our first instinct and also keep the machine running for a second one. And then also maybe compare those two instincts. And then also maybe compare those instincts to the information available. So, I do think that if the brain knew that it was a brain that had some great stuff written into its genes, but not stuff that necessarily works in this environment, since it was written in, over the last 100 generations, and we've only been like this the last 5. If these brains knew, okay, yeah, I got some cool stuff pre-installed, but also I've got this whole learning package here, and so I am free from the tethers of tradition and the slow genetic evolution of instincts. I also evolved learning capacity. And so imagine the human brain if it was hungry to run those learning packages. If we didn't have, imagine if there was a cultural shift from the value of tradition and instinct and everything that came default, and there's a cultural shift towards the importance and value of change and progress and discovery and adjustment, adaptation. What if the brain knew it was a brain and knew that it could adapt and thought that it was a cool thing to adapt? So I think that's pretty exciting to imagine. Okay, 2023, Liber 18, Aldi 1310. We're going to read the next paragraph. So the last sentence of the last paragraph was, as a result, the mammoths and the tigers, the giant sloths and dire wolves didn't survive, but our ancestors did. As glaciers continually advanced and receded, environmental changes began to occur on the scale of centuries, far too fast for genes to compensate. Our ancestors couldn't build new bodies in the time it would take to match them to the new conditions, nor could they quickly evolve new brain structures with new built-in behavioral solutions to fit the novel environments. But their existing brains had developed a suite of tools for creating new behaviors on the fly and copying them from brain to brain. Plasticity, abstraction, metacognition, language, social learning, perfect imitation, theory of mind, argumentation, and reasoning. These abilities provided an extreme adaptive advantage that set humans apart. We also had big brains to store large cultural repertoires. And most of all, we lived in groups that had adapted all the social mechanisms required to manage the political life of primates. You gotta read this book, bro. Liber 18, Aldi 1328. This is one of those books where you just can't put the mic down. Okay, so I guess I'll just pick up from where we left off. So it said, and most of all, we lived in groups that had adapted all the social mechanisms required to manage the political life of primates. Next paragraph. This is page 2621 of How Minds Change, chapter Social Change, book by David McRaney. With the pressure on, a small number of skilled or lucky innovators could produce variations to the behavioral status quo. Since each individual had the ability to imitate the best innovations with great fidelity, the new ways rapidly and reliably spread from brain to brain and replaced the old behaviors across the group. Engaged in this process, unlike their ancestors who lived in less chaotic environments, the proto-humans of the Pleistocene soon developed hammers, fire, cooking, and other technologies. A status quo lasting 1,000,000 years, shattered in a few generations. By the way, I don't know how to pronounce Pleistocene. It's spelled Pleistocene. That's Papa, Lima, Echo, India, Sierra, Tango, Oscar, Charlie, Echo, November, Echo. The hominids of the Pleistocene, with bodies ill-suited for a changing world, began to change their own minds faster than genes could do it for them. It was still genetic evolution at play, but the genes provided the ability to make, change, and accumulate ideas, beliefs, and practices. We evolved the ability to produce culture, and then culture became the environment in which we began to evolve anew. Culture shaped genes, and genes shaped culture. Though these two processes run in parallel, around 1.5 million years ago they clasped hands and have been spinning on the evolutionary dance floor ever since. Pressured by an unpredictable existence, we adapted to overcome, page 262, the slowness of genetic evolution at a time when that slowness would have wiped us out. The chaos I'm going to restart the paragraph from the bottom of page 2621. Pressured by an unpredictable existence, we adapted to overcome the slowness of genetic evolution at a time when that slowness would have wiped us out. The chaos of the Ice Age led to the adaptation of culture, a tool that freed us from waiting on genetic change to save us when things go sideways. And now when the environment changes quickly, we change quickly. Or at least we can. I mean, we do, but is it always in the best way? No, because we don't know that we're brains, and we don't know, and we end up just applying instincts to new situations. Anyway, imagine a group of early hominids. I mean, we don't have to, and we haven't always, and we don't always, and there are lots of people that are ready to adapt. We just really need to get rid of this whole intuition value. I mean, yes, the brain's mechanisms are incredible, but just sometimes they are not adapted. Those are called the maladaptive voices, the mala. Okay. Imagine a group of early hominids who lived in the savannah for decades, but conditions forced them to migrate into the forest. At first, since no one knew what to do in that new land. All right, sorry, hold on. Because I read this paragraph. I read this paragraph, a few minutes ago, and then wanted to bring you in on it. Something else I want to say, because I sometimes forget. I made a video recently where I was like, oh wait, this mission of getting brains to realize that they're brains and what that means, that actually doesn't follow me. That's going to happen. I'm a human brain, which means maybe I'm one of the, earlier or fewer human brains to realize that they're brains. But all that tells us is that all human brains are soon gonna realize. I mean, that's just how evolution, whether it's cultural, genetic, that's how that works. First, it occurs in a few individuals, and also the tools, the realization is already sort of in people. Anyway, they don't need me to tell them. Eventually, the whole species is just gonna realize, and so I often I express frustration that, why aren't people doing this? But it's just natural. You're just looking at the part of the timeline where there are a few people noticing, oh, hey, we're brains. We're not these special souls. And then, yeah, those people are going to experience a little frustration. But it's also maybe thanks to some of those people that the other ones follow through. Anyway, so now I'm going to read this paragraph. Imagine a group of early hominids who lived in the savannah for decades, but conditions forced them to migrate into the forest. At first, since no one knew what to do in that new land, they each kept the old skills and ideas, the old beliefs, norms, and customs. People starved, injured themselves, and became food for predators because the old savannah practices and technology didn't work well in the new forest setting. But as innovators happened upon behaviors and tools and skills more suited to woodland life, early adopters began to replicate them, followed by holdouts, and together groups tossed out the old ways as their new culture complexified. Within a generation, the group shifted to the new traditions and folkways. When a new batch of savannah stranglers arrived and made contact with this band of first-generation forest dwellers, they too would have had no idea what to do. But if they changed quickly, conformed to better ways, they could change even faster than did the first settlers and avoid death, disease, and starvation. I'm just going to keep going to the end of the section. Now we're reading this together for the first time. Now, imagine a group of iguanas migrating onto tundra, pushed out. Okay. Now imagine a group of iguanas migrating onto tundra, pushed out by dwindling food sources. Their survival would depend on a slow-motion genetic lottery, and if the tundra melted a century or two later, the lottery winners would be thrown right back into a new game of chance. The grind would eventually end them, whereas we grew stronger thanks to the grind. Whereas we grew stronger thanks to that grind. Pressured by environmental chaos, we gained the ability to do the right thing when that thing used to be Pressured by environmental chaos, we gained the ability to do the right thing when what used to be the right thing changed without warning. Back then, the right thing was that which kept you alive in the unforgiving wilderness. Today, the right thing is difficult to determine, and there are so many cultural variations to choose from that people clump and cluster around a host of popular alternatives. But when we need to reach a majority consensus and change quickly, as a group, we have the capacity to do so thanks to the adaptations of our ancestors. Through an accumulation of gradual improvements to our tools, both mental and physical, we have spread across the planet into regions ill-suited for our slowly evolving bodies. And where we have settled, we have survived and thrived. Along the way, what used to be the right way of doing things routinely became the wrong way. So social change gave us the ability to recognize that and rapidly adapt as individuals. With that adaptation, we gained culture and the ability to change our collective minds in a rapid, society-wide cascade when we realized our norms were harmful, misguided, dangerous, or incorrect. Changing our minds became our greatest strength as a species. Oh, you know what? I thought I was making my own point using his text, but the point I made in one of the earlier audios, that was his point all along. So he, all right, so we'll just attribute it to, Let me just see how many pages are left in this chapter. I guess you just got to read the book. We've had fun though, and this is more than enough audio for my dash cam footage. Lima 18 Alpha. The next couple of pages talked about gay marriage and how the world kind of, not the world, but maybe the U.S. kind of changed its mind on gay marriage very quickly. And it reminded me both the gay marriage debate and also the question of changing one's mind reminded me of 2004. John Kerry. And I went to a school for the financially privileged, and so there's a lot of conservatives, and my dad was staunchly liberal and against Bush. I was already sort of uninterested in the complications, the complexities of politics, but the gay marriage question made the election, although I was, 13, so I wasn't voting, pretty easy for me. And what really annoyed me, the thing I wanted to share with you, and that really confused me, would be in the lunchroom. All the kids talking about how Kerry's not a good pick because he's a flip-flopper, because he keeps changing his mind. What? So this was before I understood the absolute nonsense that our mechanisms put out, that we think and that we feel and that we're willing to consider true, and the absolute bullshit justifications that we don't even evaluate. So I was really confused. How can you possibly think that saying John Kerry keeps changing his mind is in any way compelling evidence against him? What are you talking about? And that would be enough for them. Now then, if you challenge them, maybe they'd come up with some particular, but no, it's just based on money, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but hold on. What bothers me is that at first you were compelled and thought that I would be compelled by the simple fact that he changed his mind. You didn't come up and say, oh, he just votes according to the lobbyists, and so we see that there's nothing consistent about what he purports to think. He keeps going back and forth, and it's not about new information, it's only financial interest. You didn't come to me with anything like that. You said to me, what? How can you trust the guy? He keeps changing his mind. How can you trust someone who doesn't, with all the things we keep learning? So that really annoyed me.